On my wedding night, my Amish husband locked the bedroom door from the outside. I heard the key turn and counted 3 full seconds before the meaning of the sound reached me. I was 19 years old, still wearing my wedding dress, standing in a bedroom I had never once slept in, inside a farmhouse 2 counties from the only home I had ever belonged to. The lamp on the dresser burned steadily. The quilt had been folded back by hands that were not mine. From the kitchen below, I could hear my husband's boots moving across the floor in an even, unhurried rhythm. The way a man walks when he has finished a task rather than entered a marriage. I crossed to the door and pressed my palm flat against the wood. There was no handle on my side that would do anything. The latch had been deliberately reversed. I did not weep. I did not call out his name. I stood in the lamplight and began trying to trace back to the first moment I should have seen it coming. To make sense of why I was standing inside that locked room, I have to bring you back to the previous spring, to the afternoon my father came in from the south field with mud drying on his trousers and a folded letter tucked into his shirt pocket. I grew up in a small Amish settlement in northern Indiana, and in the community where I was raised, a daughter was given 2 understandings from the time she was very young. The first was that the Lord held a plan for her life. The second was that her father would recognize that plan before she ever would. I was the third of 7 children, and the only one without a clear direction in front of me. My older sister Miriam had married a dairyman at 18. My brother Daniel had taken on our uncle's harness shop. The younger ones still had childhood ahead of them. I had what my mother called a thinking face, which in our household was not quite a compliment. That afternoon, my father placed the letter on the table between the bread plate and the salt cellar. He did not open it while I was watching. He looked first at my mother, and my mother looked at the floor, and I understood before a single word passed between any of us that something about the shape of my life had already been arranged. Eli Yoder had written, my father said, from the Hartfield district. I did not know any Eli Yoder personally. I knew the name the way you know a common word, the way you know the word for bread. My mother set a cup of coffee in front of my father and did not pour one for herself. She wiped her hands on her apron 3 times in a row, which was something she only did when she was carrying worry. He is 31, my father said. He has 120 acres. His first wife passed 2 winters ago. No children. That was all. He folded the letter back into his pocket and returned to the field. I want to be truthful about what I felt in that moment, because the story loses its honesty if I position myself as only a victim from the very beginning. I was not frightened that afternoon. I was flattered. A man with 120 acres from another district had written about me by name. I was the daughter with the thinking face, and someone had decided I was worth a letter. That night I lay in bed trying to form a picture of him, and what I pictured was gentleness, because that was what I needed to see. Eli came to visit 3 weeks later. He was tall, with a dark beard already going gray at the chin, and eyes that did not quite find mine even when he was speaking directly to me. He sat in our front room with my father for nearly 2 hours before I was called in. When I entered, he stood up. That was the first thing about him I approved of. He stood for a 19-year-old girl as though she were someone worth rising for. He asked me 3 questions: whether I could keep a garden, whether I had ever traveled outside the district, and whether I was a sound sleeper. I answered yes, no, and yes, in that order, and he received each answer with a small nod, as though he were confirming entries on a private list. After he left, my mother came into the kitchen where I was washing the cups. She stood behind me and placed one hand on my shoulder, very lightly, as if she feared applying more pressure than that. "Christina," she said, "if your father agrees to this, you will go." I did not turn around. "I know," I told her. "That is not what I am saying," she said. I waited. "I am saying that there are some houses where a woman learns to be quiet, and there are some houses where a woman is made quiet. Try to know the difference before the wedding, not after." I have turned that sentence over in my mind for 42 years. At the time, I received it as ordinary maternal worry. I did not hear the warning living inside it. My mother knew something. I am nearly certain of that now. She knew something and could not bring herself to say it plainly, because in our community, a mother who destroyed a match was understood to have failed her daughter twice over. The engagement was announced in July. The wedding was set for the second Thursday in November, after the corn was in. Between July and November, I saw Eli 4 times, and each visit was shorter than the one before. On the second visit, he brought me a small carved box of cherry wood with a brass clasp. He said it had belonged to his mother. I kept my hairpins in it. I set it on the dresser in my room, and every night before bed I ran my fingers across the clasp and tried to feel something for the man who had given it to me. On the third visit, in late August, my older sister Miriam came to our house for supper. She lived 2 miles down the road and came often. After the meal, she drew me out to the porch and asked me quietly whether I had spoken with any of Eli's neighbors. "Why would I speak with his neighbors?" I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "Christina," she said, "his first wife. Do you know how she died?" Father said a fever. "Yes," Miriam said. "A fever. That is what was said." She pressed her lips together. "Just promise me one thing. If anything happens on your wedding night that you don't understand, promise me you will not be too proud to scream." I laughed at her. I actually laughed. I told her she had been reading too many of the English newspapers her husband sometimes brought home from town. She did not laugh back. She held my hand for a moment, tightly, and then she went inside. I did not tell my mother what Miriam had said. I should have. That was the first of many small silences I chose, and each one made the next one come more easily. The wedding day itself unfolded in the ordinary way our weddings unfold. There were 300 people in the Yoder barn, celery on every table. The service ran nearly 4 hours. I knelt beside Eli and spoke the vows I had been learning to make since I was old enough to fold my hands in prayer. When the bishop placed our hands together, Eli's palm was cool and dry. He did not press my fingers. He did not look at me. He looked instead at his older brother Amos, who stood in the second row behind us. Amos gave one small, nearly imperceptible nod, the kind you give when a transaction has been confirmed. I noticed that nod. I stored it away without yet knowing what it meant. After the meal, after the singing, after the long and quiet goodbye to my mother in the side yard while the lanterns were being lit, Eli drove me in his buggy to the Hartfield farm. We did not speak on the road. The horse knew the way. The stars were already fully out by the time we turned into the lane. The house was larger than I had imagined. 2 stories of white clapboard with a wraparound porch. A woman stood on the porch holding a lantern. She was perhaps 60, lean, with a face shaped by weather and a particular kind of refusal. Eli introduced her as his Aunt Fanny. She did not smile. She looked me over the way a person examines cloth for flaws in the weave. "The room is ready," she said, and she said it to Eli, not to me. He nodded. He lifted my small trunk from the back of the buggy and carried it up the stairs without a word. Fanny followed me into the kitchen and directed my attention to a cup sitting on the table. "Drink that," she said. "It has been a long day. You will sleep better." I drank it. It tasted faintly of something herbal, like chamomile but coarser. I thought nothing of it in the moment. In our community, older women regularly pressed teas and tonics on younger women, particularly on wedding nights, and declining without cause was considered an offense. Eli came back downstairs. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his aunt, and his aunt looked at him, and something moved between them that had nothing to do with me. Then he said, "Christina, come." I followed him up the stairs. The hallway held the smell of beeswax and old wood. He opened the second door on the right. The lamp was already burning. The quilt was already folded back. The carved cherrywood box from my dresser at home was sitting on the new dresser, placed there by someone while we were still at the meal. "This is your room," he said. I registered the word your, not ours. I began to turn to ask him what he meant by it, and that was when he stepped back into the hallway and drew the door closed between us. And then I heard the key. That is where everything began for me. On the inside of that door with my palm pressed to the wood. I did not sleep. Whatever had been in the cup made my head feel weighted, but I fought it. I sat on the edge of the bed in my wedding dress for what must have been 2 hours, listening. Eli's boots went back down the stairs. The front door opened and closed. A second buggy came up the lane, then a third. I heard voices in the kitchen below me, low and close, men's voices and Fanny's voice, and once, distinctly, a woman crying. Not loudly, not desperately, the careful, swallowed crying of someone who has been instructed to keep it contained. Then the voices faded. The buggies left. The house went still. And somewhere inside that stillness, I lay down on top of the quilt in my wedding dress and finally surrendered to sleep. The key turned again at dawn. Fanny came in carrying a basin of water and a clean apron folded over her arm. She did not apologize. She did not offer any explanation. She set the basin on the dresser and said, "Eli is in the barn. Breakfast is at 6. I asked her, as steadily as I could manage, why the door had been locked. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "In this house, on the first night, the door is always locked. It is for your protection. You will understand in time." I did not understand. Not for nearly a year. Life in the Hartfield farmhouse settled into a shape I could observe but not name. Eli was not cruel. That is the part that took me the longest to explain to myself. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise his hand. He ate the meals I cooked and thanked me for them. He slept in a separate room down the hall, and on the nights when he came to mine, he knocked first and left before morning. Fanny lived in the small dry house behind the kitchen and came in at 6 every day to oversee the household. She did not oversee me. She oversaw Eli. The bedroom door was locked every night from the outside, not by Eli, by Fanny. I would hear her steps in the hallway after the lamps were out, and then the small, dry click of the key. In the morning she would unlock it before I came down. In the early weeks I told myself it was a custom. Every district holds customs that appear strange from the outside. I told myself that asking the wrong question would shame my new family, and that word would travel back to my father. I want you to understand how a person makes sense of a locked door. Not all at once, in pieces, over time. You tell yourself it is only at night. You tell yourself you would not go anywhere anyway. You tell yourself your husband is a quiet man who has lost a wife and must be permitted his peculiarities. You tell yourself that the carved cherry wood box was a gift, and a man who gives a gift is not a man who intends harm. The first fracture came in February, 3 months after the wedding. I was hanging wash on the line behind the house when a woman I had never seen before walked up the lane. She was perhaps 40, plainly dressed, with a basket of eggs over her arm. She said her name was Lydia Bear, and she had come to welcome me late because she had been away visiting her sister in Ohio. We stood by the line and talked for perhaps 10 minutes. She asked about my family, about how I was settling in, and then very carefully, without looking at me, she said, "Christina, Eli's first wife Sarah. She was my cousin." I told her I was sorry for her loss. Lydia set the basket down. "Christina, has Fanny told you how Sarah died?" "A fever," I said. "Yes," Lydia said. "A fever." She looked at the kitchen window of the house, and I could see her decide something inside herself. "Christina," she said, "Sarah was a sleepwalker from childhood. Her family told Eli before the wedding. They told him plainly. The locked door at night was meant to protect her. She had walked into the pond once as a small girl. Her mother found her near the road another time. I felt the cold move up through my shoes and settle in my chest. She died of a fever." Lydia said that part is true. But the fever came after she was found in February, 3 years ago, in the snow. She had gotten out somehow. No one knows how. She walked nearly a mile before anyone reached her. The fever took her 4 days later. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Why is my door locked?" Lydia picked up the basket. She would not look at me. "Christina," she said, "I do not know what Eli has told you about yourself, but you are not a sleepwalker. You have never been a sleepwalker. There is no reason for that door to be locked." She left the eggs on the porch step and walked back down the lane. I stood by the wash line for a long time. The wind pushed the sheets. I could hear Fanny inside the kitchen stirring something on the stove. And I understood all at once that the lock on my door had nothing to do with me, and yet everything to do with me. The lock had been built for Sarah. The habit had survived her. The aunt who had loved Sarah and could not save her had decided, alone or with Eli's silent agreement, that no new wife in that house would ever again be permitted to wander in the night, whether I needed it or not, whether I wanted it or not. The protection had become a cage, and the cage had been waiting, empty, for a body to occupy it. I will not tell you I confronted Eli that evening. I did not. I went into the kitchen and finished the bread. I served supper. I sat across from my husband and watched him eat, and I thought about the cup Fanny had handed me on my wedding night, and the careful crying I had heard from the kitchen below, and the second and third buggies that had arrived in the dark. I understood then that Fanny had been grieving Sarah that night, mourning her with her own people in the kitchen of the house where Sarah had lived, while a new bride slept upstairs behind a locked door. It was grief. It was grief that had been allowed to govern a household for so long that it had stopped resembling grief and had begun to resemble law. I waited until April. I will not claim it was strategy. It was fear. I waited until my sister Miriam wrote saying she would be passing through Hartfield with her husband on the way to a funeral, and could she stop for the afternoon. I wrote back yes. I underlined it twice. The day she came, I asked Fanny whether I might take my sister upstairs to see my room. Fanny hesitated, then agreed, because to refuse would have seemed strange. Miriam followed me up the stairs. I closed the bedroom door behind us. I showed her the lock. I showed her the reversed latch. I whispered to her about Sarah, about Lydia, about the cup of tea, about the months of small dry clicks in the hallway after dark. Miriam did not cry. She did not say she had warned me. She sat on the edge of the bed and was quiet for a long stretch. Then she said, "Christina, do you want to come home?" I had not let myself ask that question out loud in 5 months. I did not know I had an answer until she spoke it. I nodded. "Pack the cherry box," she said. "Pack one dress. Pack nothing else. We leave today, in our buggy, while Fanny believes you are walking us to the road." That was the choice that could not be undone. I made it sitting on the edge of a bed in a room that had been constructed to contain another woman's grief. I packed the cherrywood box. I packed one dress. I walked my sister and her husband to the end of the lane, and when their buggy reached the road, I climbed in beside her, and we drove away while Fanny was at the supper dishes and Eli was still in the south barn. He did not come after me. That is the detail that has remained with me the longest. Eli did not come after me. He sent a letter 2 weeks later to my father. It said only that he wished me well, that he would not contest a separation, and that the return of the carved cherrywood box would be appreciated, as it had belonged to his mother. My father wrote back that the box would be returned. I gave it to him. I never saw it again. There was no formal shunning. There were whispers. There were Sundays when certain families arranged themselves away from ours. There was a long conversation with our bishop in which I was asked, gently at first and then with more pressure, whether I had given the marriage a fair chance. I told him about the lock. He listened without interrupting. He did not argue with me. He said only, "Christina, a door that locks from the outside is not a marriage bed. It is a stable." That was everything he ever said about it, and it was sufficient. I learned years afterward, through a letter from Lydia Bear, that Fanny had died in the winter of my 4th year away, and that Eli had married again the following spring, and that the new wife had been told before the wedding about the lock, and about Sarah, and had agreed to it as part of the household's way. I do not know that woman. I have prayed for her more times than I am able to count. I am 61 now. I married again 11 years after leaving Hartfield, a quiet man named John from my home district, who built me a house with doors that have handles on both sides. We have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. The youngest of them, a girl of 7, is named Sarah. My daughter says after no one in particular, though I hold my own quiet thoughts about that. I have told this story only twice before now. Once to John, on the night he asked me to marry him, because I believed he deserved to know what kind of woman he was choosing. And once to Miriam, the week before she died last spring, because she asked me, holding my hand in her hospital bed, whether I had ever forgiven Eli. I told her I had forgiven him for what he did not understand. I had not forgiven him for what he allowed. On winter nights sometimes, when John is already asleep and the house is settling quietly around me, I return in my mind to that first hour in the lamplight, with my palm against the wood, listening to the key complete its turn from the other side. I was 19 years old in a wedding dress, standing in a room that had been built for another woman's safety, and I did not yet know that the lock was older than I was, or that the grief sealed inside it was not mine to carry, or that the only passage out of a house like that is to walk through the front door in full daylight while someone you love is waiting for you at the far end of the lane. The lock was never meant for me. That is what took me the longest to finally learn. And in the end, It is the only understanding that ever gave me back myself.